The old library felt suffocating. Dust hung thick in the air, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. Every inch of the room whispered secrets, centuries old and buried deep within the musty pages of forgotten books. But what really unsettled her were the strange symbols that covered the walls, carved into the wood like a cryptic warning. They were no longer a mere curiosity, not after the whisper had come, the soft, almost imperceptible murmur that led her here, to this very moment. Her fingers traced the uneven lines, feeling the cold burn of the carvings, and then a sudden surge of energy coursed through her, a flash of light that made her stagger back. The room trembled, and the ground beneath her feet shifted. A scream broke the silence, a sound so terrifyingly raw that it felt like it came from the very soul of the building itself. A voice, deeper than any human could ever manage, echoed in her ears. "You should have never come." Her breath hitched, panic gripping her chest as the truth started to reveal itself. Her breath was shallow, the panic rising in her chest as the ground beneath her seemed to split open. She stumbled back, her mind racing for answers, but the symbols on the walls blurred, their meanings no longer clear. The voice echoed again, low and rumbling, sending shivers down her spine. "You shouldn't have come." Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out all other sounds. The room was no longer just a library. It had become a trap, a living, breathing entity designed to keep her here. A cold gust of air whipped around her, the library's atmosphere now heavy with something ancient and malicious. As she turned to flee, the door that had been ajar moments ago slammed shut with a deafening bang, sealing her fate within the crumbling walls of the forsaken place. The library's silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her rapid breathing. She pounded her fists against the door, desperate to escape, but it wouldn't budge. Panic threatened to overtake her as her fingers grazed the symbols once again, the strange, cold energy surging through her skin. The voice spoke once more, its tone now mocking. "You think you can leave?" Her body froze, her mind clouded by a rush of visions, flashes of figures she couldn't recognize, of people she'd never met, their faces twisted in agony. The truth that had been hidden for so long began to take shape, a revelation so terrifying that it left her reeling. She wasn't just trapped in the library, she was part of a much darker story. A story that had begun long before her arrival, one that had been written in blood and shadow. Her breath quickened as the room began to close in, the walls seemingly shifting to trap her. Her mind spun with panic, and for a moment, she thought she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing. Only shadows. The door, once again, felt miles away. The cold, clammy air pressed against her skin as she took hesitant steps toward the farthest corner, but each step seemed to carry a weight of dread. The symbols seemed to writhe, their meanings unclear, yet she knew they were alive, their energy pulsing. She couldn't escape. There was no way out. Her eyes locked onto a bookshelf, its contents shaking violently. Then it fell. Not naturally. Something had pushed it. Her heart raced as she turned back to face the symbols. The whispers came again, this time louder, more demanding. "You have awakened us." Desperation clawed at her chest as the walls seemed to close in further. She had to get out. She had to find a way. But there was no escape from this place, not now. The symbol's glow reached a fever pitch, blinding her, and then silence. The room was still. For a moment, she thought the nightmare had ended, that the terror had been a trick of the mind. But when she turned, she saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, tall and cloaked in shadows, its eyes glowing with the same ominous light as the symbols. The air around her grew thick with dread. "It's too late," the voice whispered from the figure's lips. And with that, everything changed. The woman's heart pounded as she stood in the center of the room, the air thick with the weight of secrets she didn't understand. Who was she really? The world had always seemed so ordinary, and yet now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. The library was no longer just a collection of old books. It was a cage, and the symbols on the walls were the bars. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the peaceful days before this all began. The days when she was just a librarian with a quiet life, surrounded by the comforting silence of the stacks. But that woman no longer existed. Who she had been, who she thought she was, had been shattered by the whispers and the strange, malevolent energy that surrounded her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the book she had been studying earlier, the one that had started it all. But something told her that what she would find within its pages would change everything forever. The pages of the book felt cold against her fingertips as she flipped through them, her eyes scanning the cryptic text. The language was foreign, incomprehensible, yet there was something familiar about it, like a memory from a dream she couldn't quite place. She paused, her eyes locking onto a single line, written in bold ancient script: "The one who awakens the symbols shall face the truth." The words echoed in her mind, reverberating in a way that sent chills down her spine. She had unknowingly set this curse into motion, but the truth, what truth, was still a mystery. What did it mean? Who had written these words? And why had she been drawn here, to this place, at this time? The deeper she delved into the pages, the more she felt the room grow colder, the symbols pulsing with an unsettling rhythm, like the heartbeat of something ancient and very much alive. The library seemed to shift around her, the shelves and books blurring as the symbols on the walls glowed brighter. The cold, oppressive atmosphere pressed against her chest, making it harder to breathe. The air felt thick with a presence, a sense that something was watching her. And then, a voice, soft, almost imperceptible, whispered in her ear, though no one else was in the room. "You've unlocked the door," it said, the words drenched in malice. Her heart skipped a beat as she spun around, expecting to find someone there, but the room remained empty, save for the shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. She stumbled back, the book falling from her hands to the floor. The symbols on the walls shifted again, rearranging themselves into a new pattern, a pattern that seemed to make her blood run cold. This was no longer just a library. This was a portal, a doorway to something far darker than she could ever imagine. Her pulse raced, the fear tightening in her chest as the realization hit her. The library was alive. The symbols, the whispers, the cold presence. It was all part of something much bigger than she could understand. The door, which had once seemed like her escape, now appeared to be nothing more than an illusion. She rushed toward it, desperate to leave, but when her hands grasped the handle, it was as if the door had fused with the frame itself. It wouldn't open. She slammed her body against it in a frantic attempt to break free, but nothing changed. The room seemed to close in on her, the shelves shifting and narrowing the space, as if pushing her back toward the center of the room. The symbols on the walls now pulsed in time with her heartbeat, each beat sending a surge of cold energy through her body. She was trapped, and she had no idea how to escape the growing nightmare she had awakened. Desperation clawed at her as she backed away from the door, her eyes scanning the room for another exit, but there was none. The library was a labyrinth, its walls alive with the ever-changing symbols and whispers. A sudden surge of anger filled her, the kind of anger that pushed through the layers of fear and doubt. She wasn't going to let this place claim her. She refused to be its prisoner. Her hand grasped the nearest book, a dusty tome she hadn't noticed before. She opened it without hesitation, her eyes scanning the pages with feverish determination. The words were still foreign, but now they seemed to make sense. She read aloud, her voice trembling as she spoke the words from the book, unsure if she was casting a spell or sealing her fate. The air in the room grew heavier, the symbols on the walls shifting once again, but this time they seemed to react to her words. The air in the library felt thick with anticipation, the energy swirling around her like a storm. Each breath felt like an effort, her chest tightening as the symbols continued to shift and pulse on the walls. She had thought she was gaining control by speaking the words from the book, but instead, the room seemed to respond in ways she couldn't understand. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and with each passing moment, she could feel something or someone growing closer. She wasn't alone in the room. She had been wrong to think she could control this. The book had awakened something that had been dormant for centuries. A shift in the shadows at the edge of the room caught her attention. For the first time she felt the presence of another person. Someone who shouldn't be there. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" The voice was familiar, yet unfamiliar. Cold, filled with an edge that sent a chill down her spine. She spun around, her heart racing as her eyes searched the dimly lit room. The shadow had disappeared, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she stepped backward, the weight of her own fear pressing against her chest. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The room remained silent, the only sound the rustling of old pages and the faint hum of the symbols. She reached for the book again, desperate for any clue that could make sense of what was happening. But as her fingers brushed over the pages, she saw something she hadn't before, a new symbol, written in red ink. It was not part of the original carvings. This was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't exist. The presence in the room was growing stronger, more tangible, like a physical force pressing in from all sides. She wasn't alone anymore. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the room, sending a shockwave of fear through her body. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and bend, twisting into forms she couldn't fully comprehend. Something was emerging from the darkness, something that had been hidden for centuries. The symbols on the walls pulsed rapidly now, as if they were alive, as if they were feeding the dark presence that had begun to form before her. She backed away, her breath quickening as she realized the truth. The library wasn't just a place of knowledge. It was a prison that had been holding something far worse than the mere secrets of the past. The air grew cold, frost creeping along the shelves and floor. And then she saw it, a figure, cloaked in shadows with eyes that glowed like molten lava. The figure spoke, its voice reverberating through the room like thunder. "You have released me." The figure stepped forward, its movements slow but deliberate, each step sending a ripple of darkness through the room. The symbols on the walls seemed to react to its presence, flickering violently as if they were in pain. The woman's mind raced. This was the entity she had unknowingly awakened. This was the source of the power that had haunted the library for centuries. She felt a sudden, overwhelming surge of terror, her body frozen in place as the figure approached. "What do you want from me?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. The figure's lips curled into a grin, its eyes burning with malice. "I want you to witness the truth that has been hidden for far too long." Its voice was a hiss, like 1,000 whispers speaking at once. She had no idea what truth it was referring to, but she knew it wasn't something she wanted to learn. The figure raised its hand, and the air grew colder still. The frost on the shelves deepened, spreading across the floor like a creeping tide. With a sudden motion, it gestured toward the woman. "You've been chosen," it said, its voice heavy with a dark, malevolent power. "You will be the vessel, the key to unlocking the truth of this place, to set us free." The words felt like a punch to her gut, and for the first time she felt truly powerless. She had thought she was in control, but now she realized that she was a mere pawn in a game far older and far more dangerous than she could comprehend. The figure's hand moved again, and the book she had been holding flew from her hands, its pages flipping wildly. A burst of light erupted from the center of the room, blinding her for a moment, and when the light receded, she saw it, an opening, a gateway that led into nothingness. Step through, and learn what lies beyond. The woman stood frozen, staring at the swirling void that had opened in front of her. It felt like time itself had stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to escape, but her body refused to move. The figure stood behind her, its eyes still burning with that same cold malice, but now something else was beginning to sink in, a truth she had been blind to. "You've been chosen, yes," the figure continued, its voice a low hiss. "But not for what you think." The words sent a shock through her, a cold realization tightening in her chest. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. The figure smiled darkly. You were never meant to release me. You were meant to bring yourself here. You are not a victim, but a part of the plan. The truth was almost too much to bear. She had been part of something far darker than she could have ever imagined. The room spun around her as the revelations sank in. As the figure's words lingered in the air, the room seemed to shift again. The ground beneath her feet felt unstable, as though the very foundation of the library was being uprooted. The symbols on the walls twisted and contorted, becoming unrecognizable as they shifted into new forms, a language she could not understand. You were never supposed to understand, the figure said, its voice dripping with venom. The library is more than a place of knowledge. It is a conduit, an ancient gateway to a power that was never meant to be set free. The woman's mind raced. She wasn't just a bystander. She had unknowingly unlocked something that had been sealed away, waiting for her. And now, the power was beginning to awaken. The library, the symbols, the figure, it had all been leading to this moment. And now, the figure whispered, "You will become the key." The woman felt her heart race, the weight of the truth crashing down on her. She had been tricked. The library, the strange symbols, it was all part of a plan she couldn't fully understand. She had thought she was merely a visitor, someone who stumbled upon something ancient and hidden, but in reality, she had been chosen. She had been brought here for a reason, to unlock the doorway that led to something far worse than she could have ever imagined. The figure stepped forward, its eyes glowing brighter, the power in the room escalating. "It's too late for regret," it whispered. "You cannot undo what has been done." The woman felt the overwhelming weight of her actions. She had unlocked a force far beyond her comprehension, and now it was too late to stop it. She had been a pawn in a game much larger than herself. And now there would be no escape. Suddenly, everything fell silent. The noise of the symbols, the growling energy, it all stopped. The room froze, and for a moment she thought she had imagined it. But then she saw it. The figure, once towering and imposing, began to shimmer and shift. Its form blurred, the darkness surrounding it folding in on itself. And then, with a shocking clarity, it transformed. The figure was no longer the monstrous shadow it had been. It was her. The same face, the same eyes, the same trembling fear. "You are the key, but also the prisoner," the voice, now coming from her own lips, said. "The library is not just a place. It is a reflection of your soul, your darkness, your desire for power. It is all trapped here." The realization hit her like a blow. She wasn't just part of the plan. She had been the one who designed it. She was both the architect and the prisoner, caught in a cycle she couldn't break. The woman's mind reeled. She had been both the cause and the victim of everything that had happened. The power, the whispers, the opening of the portal, it had all been her doing. She had trapped herself in this nightmare, unknowingly creating the conditions for the darkness to be unleashed. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "This can't be me." But the figure, her reflection, smiled. "It is," it said. "You have always known. The darkness was never just in this place. It was in you all along." The room seemed to close in around her, the symbols now growing more aggressive, pulsing with dark energy. She had no choice now. She was the key, the one who had unlocked this nightmare, and now she would have to face it. The figure reached out, its hand now offering her the truth she had long denied. "Come," it beckoned. "Step through the doorway. You will see everything." The weight of the truth crushed her. She had been both the architect and the victim, the one who set the events into motion. But now, standing in front of the twisted reflection of herself, she saw no way out. The symbols around the room pulsed in sync with her heartbeat, their rhythm accelerating as the darkness began to tighten its grip. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room felt as though it was closing in on her, and yet the reflection, her reflection, stood still, waiting. The figure's smile grew wider, more sinister, as if relishing the torment in her eyes. "You cannot escape what you've awakened," it whispered, its voice a cruel echo of her own. "This is your fate, your punishment for wanting to control what you should never have touched." She stepped back, her heart pounding. But the truth had already been revealed, and no matter how far she ran, the darkness inside her would always follow. She had no choice but to face it. Her breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer to the reflection. She could feel the dark power swirling around her, an energy so powerful it seemed to choke the air from her lungs. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, her voice shaking. The figure smiled again, a slow, predatory grin that sent a shiver down her spine. "Of course you didn't. But you are the one who unlocked the door. You are the one who set this in motion." The figure's eyes burned with a fiery intensity as it took a step toward her, its form now fully materialized. "The truth is, you have always known. You always knew the power you held, but you were too blind to see it." She stumbled backward, the weight of her own guilt heavy on her shoulders. The library, the symbols, the whispers, the opening of the portal, had all been a reflection of her inner darkness. The truth she had tried to ignore was now undeniable. She couldn't run anymore. The reflection, the figure, was a part of her now, a dark mirror of everything she had tried to suppress. The whispers in her mind grew louder, mingling with the figure's voice. "You've always wanted power," it taunted. "You wanted to control the world around you. But you never knew what true control was. Now, you will learn." Her heart raced as she felt the room shift around her. The portal loomed, a dark and swirling void that promised freedom or destruction. The symbols on the walls surged with energy, their light now blinding. She could hear the figure's voice in her head, urging her forward. "Step through the doorway. Embrace your fate." Her legs felt like lead, but somehow she couldn't stop herself. The temptation was too great. The darkness called to her, offering her power beyond her wildest dreams. And for a moment, she almost believed she could take it. Just as she stepped forward, the voice inside her snapped. No. This wasn't her. This wasn't who she was meant to be. The darkness had been tempting, promising power, but it was a lie. The truth was not in the void, not in the power of the symbols or the reflection. It was in her choice. She could feel the pull of the darkness trying to claim her, but she fought back. "I won't let you take me," she whispered through gritted teeth, her hands trembling as she reached for the book once more. The words on the pages, the ancient script, began to glow again, but this time, the symbols didn't feel like a curse. They felt like a weapon. Her weapon. The figure behind her hissed, its form shifting and warping as the power in the room surged. "You think you can escape?" it growled. But the woman stood firm. She had a choice now. She was going to end this, one way or another. The look in her hands trembled as she read the words aloud. Louder now, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. The room trembled, and the dark figure let out a roar of fury, its form distorting as the light from the book grew brighter. The symbols on the walls began to shift once more, but this time they were not just reacting to the figure's power, they were fighting back. The figure's cries grew more frantic, but the woman didn't stop. "You're not in control anymore," she said, her voice steady now, filled with defiance. The ground shook, and the portal flickered and began to collapse, the darkness slowly retreating. The figure screamed in agony as the power of the symbols turned against it. And then, with one final deafening roar, it vanished, leaving only the woman standing in the center of the room. She had done it. She had stopped it. But as the silence settled in, she realized the cost. The library was still alive. And it had changed her forever. The library stood still, the oppressive weight of the energy that had filled the room now gone. The air was lighter, almost soothing, but it was not without a lingering chill, a reminder of what had transpired. She stood in the center of the room, her breath steady, but her body felt heavy, as if the battle had taken more from her than she could comprehend. The symbols on the walls no longer pulsed with dark power. Instead, They seemed dormant, as though waiting. She ran a hand over the book she still held, the pages now silent, the words no longer glowing with ominous intent. There was a strange emptiness in the room, a silence that made her question everything she had just experienced. Was it over? Or had she only succeeded in sealing the darkness away temporarily? She closed her eyes, but even in the quiet, she could still hear the whispers, faint and far off. They had not gone away. They were just waiting for the next time, for the next soul to come. She knew she could never forget what had happened. The library, once a place of knowledge and peace, had become a prison, both for her and for the darkness it contained. And though the physical battle was over, she understood now that the true battle had always been within herself. She had tried to control the forces of the unknown, and in doing so, had unleashed a power far more dangerous than she could have imagined. The reflection of herself, the figure that had taunted and manipulated her, it was a part of her. She had learned to confront the darkness inside of her, but that darkness would never truly be gone. She would carry it with her always. With a sigh, she closed the book, the final chapter of this chapter in her life now closed. But in her heart, she knew this was not an ending. It was only a pause. The library would always be waiting for the next soul to discover it, and when that happened, the cycle would begin again. As she moved toward the door, the weight of the experience felt almost too much to bear. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, and the library seemed to watch her, its silence deafening. Her hand reached for the door handle, but as her fingers brushed against the cool metal, she hesitated. The thought crossed her mind. Had she truly escaped? The truth was she wasn't sure anymore. The power of the library, the symbols, and the figure. It all felt too real, too overwhelming. And yet, there was a part of her that wanted to walk away, to leave it all behind, and never look back. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. Not entirely. She would never truly escape the darkness. It would follow her, as it always had. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped into the light beyond, leaving the library behind. For now, at least. The moment she stepped out of the library, she could feel the weight of the air shift. It was as if the world had changed, yet nothing had really changed at all. The trees outside swayed gently in the breeze. The sky a clear, peaceful blue. The streets were quiet, people walking by with their everyday lives, oblivious to the horrors she had just faced. It felt surreal. How could life just continue as if nothing had happened? And yet, she knew better. She knew that nothing would ever be the same. The library was not just a place. It was a mark on her soul, a scar that would never fade. The memories of the darkness, of the symbols and the figure, would haunt her forever. She had faced it, defeated it, but the fight was not truly over. It would always be waiting. But for now, she was free. She had made it out. For now. As the woman walked down the street, she felt a strange sense of calm. But beneath it, there was an undeniable sense of foreboding. The library had been a test, a trial that she had passed. But she had not emerged unscathed. The memories of what she had seen, what she had faced, would never fade. The whispers still echoed in her mind, faint but persistent. The darkness she had battled had left its mark on her, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it resurfaced. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the library standing in the distance, waiting for her return. But the street was empty. Nothing was there. And yet, she could feel it, waiting. The next soul would come. The cycle would begin again. But she had learned something. She was not helpless anymore. She had faced the darkness, and she had survived. For now, that was enough. Days passed, and the woman tried to adjust to her new reality. The memories of the library lingered, haunting her every waking moment. She would lie in bed at night, the shadows in her room flickering with distorted shapes, and hear the whispers that had once surrounded her in the library. The feeling of being watched never truly left her. Sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could still hear the deep echoing voice of the figure calling her back. "You cannot escape," it whispered, a dark promise. It was not the truth she had learned to face, it was the truth she had tried to leave behind. But what if it was all just the beginning? She found herself standing on the edge of something darker, something more dangerous than before. Could she truly leave the library's legacy behind? Or was she destined to return, drawn by forces she didn't fully understand? She couldn't ignore it anymore. The library's grip on her life had tightened like a vice, and she knew that no matter how far she ran, it would always follow. The whispers had only grown stronger, their reach expanding. One evening, while walking through the streets of the city, she felt it again, a strange, familiar pull. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. The energy from the library, from the dark forces she had awakened, was calling to her. She paused, her breath catching in her throat. Something told her that this time, it wasn't just a memory. It wasn't just her mind playing tricks. It was the real thing, drawing her back to the place she had tried so desperately to escape. Her heart pounded, and for a moment, she stood there, torn between the life she wanted to lead and the haunting call of the library. She couldn't fight it any longer. The pull was too strong. Her legs moved of their own accord, guiding her back down the familiar path, towards the library she had tried to forget. As she neared the entrance, the door, which she thought had been sealed for good, creaked open, as if it had been waiting for her return. The air around her grew thick with the same energy she had felt before, a suffocating presence that seemed to wrap around her like chains. She stepped inside, the door shutting behind her with a final resonant thud. The library was unchanged. The walls were covered in the same cryptic symbols, the same flickering shadows danced in the corners. But there was something new. The energy was different this time, heavier, darker, as if the library had been waiting for her to return, to face the truth that was still locked away within its walls. The silence inside the library was suffocating. As she walked deeper into the room, the symbols on the walls seemed to shift and move, as though they were alive, responding to her presence. Her footsteps echoed loudly in the stillness, amplifying the tension that filled the air. The book she had once held, the key to everything, sat on the pedestal, in the center of the room. It was open, waiting for her. The whispers grew louder, rising in volume as she approached the book. "Come," the voice called. "It's time to finish what you started." Her heart raced as she reached out, her fingers brushing against the pages. The truth was there, written in the ancient text, but now the power it held was hers to wield. The library was hers, and she knew that with the knowledge within her grasp, she could control everything, or destroy it all. The question was, which path would she take? She took a deep breath, her fingers closing around the book. In that moment, everything felt both impossibly distant and horribly immediate. The power surged through her fingertips as she began to read aloud, the ancient words flowing from her lips with an unsettling ease. The room trembled around her, the symbols on the walls flickering and merging into a single blinding light. For a moment she felt herself consumed by it, drowning in the energy that filled the library. And then, with a sudden and jarring silence, it stopped. The light faded, and the room was still. She stood alone, the book closed in her hands, but something had changed. The library, the power, it was no longer just an external force, it was inside her now. She could feel it. As she walked toward the door, she heard the whispers once more, but this time, they were different. They weren't calling her back. They were a warning. The cycle begins again.